At the moment, EU countries buy about 450,000 barrels per day in oil exports from Iran, making the bloc the second largest market for Iranian oil after China. But all this could change if the EU decides to go ahead with a full embargo on Iranian oil imports at a highly anticipated foreign affairs meeting on January the 23rd here in Brussels. The pressure's on. 8 US senators sent EU Foreign Affairs Chief a letter this week asking the EU to push through with these sanctions, because up till recently, Greece was blocking the ban due to its reliance on Iranian oil. To get some insight, I'm joined here today by Iran expert and chair of the Iran delegation here at the European Parliament, the Finnish MEP, Tarja Cronberg. Things seem to be heating up lately. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think at the core there's uranium enrichment, and the West is afraid that, or assumes that Iran is trying for nuclear weapons. And some experts say, well, Iran is developing nuclear technology only to the sort of a threshold level so they can develop weapons if needed. And then Iranians themselves say that they are only using uranium enrichments for civil purposes. And this is their right according to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the question is about interpretation of what is Iran actually doing.
Yeah.
And I think that my impression is that everybody is getting into a corner now, and the dialogue is very harsh, and there's really no communication. And I think that the EU should now create some space for negotiations.
Okay, but on the 23rd, the EU will meet, well, the Foreign Affairs Minister will meet here with Catherine Ashton to decide on this embargo. And at the last Foreign Affairs meeting before Christmas, it was Greece who blocked this, because they're, of course, so dependent on Iranian oil, as is Spain and Italy. Do you think this is going to happen? They're going to go ahead with this full embargo? According to the wires, it's already a done deal.
I expect that it will go ahead. The US, Canada and the British have already approved these kind of sanctions. And I think personally it's very unfortunate if the EU goes along with these sanctions. Mainly because then everybody will be in a situation where the power play becomes harsher and harsher, and it may end up in a military intervention at the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that the EU should now maybe threaten with sanctions. But right now the Iranians have asked to resume negotiations, and this will probably take place in Turkey. And the EU, the so-called P5, which is the 5 countries in the Security Council, and Germany, are taking part in these negotiations. I think these negotiations should have space to succeed, at least before the approval of the sanctions.
Because what would these sanctions, what effect will they have on countries like Greece, Italy and Spain?
Well, I think they will have effects on countries like Greece and Spain and Italy, but who are buyers of Iranian oil. I assume that the EU has made sure that these countries can get their oil from other sources. I think Saudi Arabia is increasing its oil production. The International Energy Agency has some supplies. So I assume that they will be not harshly hit by these sanctions. I think the problems are in different directions. First of all, I think that the sanctions will actually rally support for the regime among the Iranian citizens. And this is actually opposite to what the West wants. The West actually should sort of support the Iranian opposition and activities. So this means actually that the West is maybe acting against its own interests, and there will be more support for the regime. The Iranians will feel they are isolated, and they will be more united than otherwise. The second thing is that it has an effect on the world markets. I think experts are now sort of looking at how much the price of oil will increase. And the critical question is, of course, if China will be part of this embargo or not. I think the Americans are trying now to convince the Chinese. The Chinese have said that they will not be part of it. What the end result will be will have critical effect on whether the sanctions work or not. And the third thing is that sanctions, I think Iranians will be put on a very, very difficult corner, and it will probably result in some kind of military action. And I think the world does not need military action at this time. We have seen Iraq, we have seen Afghanistan, we have seen the Arab Spring, and
what
right
sort
now,
of military action could you envisage? Would it be like airstrikes from Israel?
I think what has been talked about, of course, is the strike from Israel. But if the Iranians decide to close the Strait of Hormuz, I think this will lead into American military intervention against this closure. So it will be some kind of military activity on the strait.
And you've been chair of this delegation, of the Iran delegation, since September. How are you
right.
getting on with this? How are you getting on? Is it easy to communicate with the regime?
Well, we are not actually communicating with the regime. We are communicating with the experts, trying to understand what's going on. And we just before Christmas we had a hearing where we had a former director of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the head negotiator on the Iranian side to talk about this problem of the nuclear dossier. And I think there are possibilities of reaching agreement. I think the problem is that the parties are not talking to each other right now. And in my view, there are reasonable possible results of negotiations where actually the West could approve that Iran does enrich uranium, but not to the weapon grade, and does it under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which then is able to control it. So I think the West has to give some accept of enrichment of uranium, because it's very much built into the Iranian pride and their self-respect. And on the other hand, then you have to require controls so that no nuclear weapons are produced.
So what should Catherine Ashton do about this letter from the 8 senators that she received this week?
The letter was from...
The letter basically telling Europe to support the US with these sanctions.
Yes, well, she has also received a letter from the Iranians asking for negotiations.
But she hasn't got a reply, has she?
I think she has informally replied that she's willing to start negotiations. There are at least some press releases from Turkey that Turkey is selected as the place. So hopefully these negotiations will go on. And hopefully, if she can't deny the sanctions, then I think at least she should push for the sanctions not to take place at once. That the threat of sanctions is probably equally effective than the actual sanctions and have less impact on the world economy. I think Barack Obama is in a difficult situation now because he got a law from the Congress which actually forces him to implement the sanctions. And there's a clause, however, that he can, I think, have 6 months of time to adjust or something like that. So hopefully the sanctions will not take place immediately. Hopefully this will result in the fact that negotiations and diplomacy has
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. On the 23rd of January here in Brussels, the Foreign Affairs Committee the Foreign Affairs Council meeting will keep an eye on that. Tarja Cronberg, thank you very much for meeting me here today for a coffee.
Thank you. Thank you for the coffee.